All right, so 10.1. First thing to go over is the tier set. So the 2-piece, it extended the duration of Arcane Surge by 3 seconds, but more importantly, it increased the amount of damage that you get from Arcane Surge. And I think that this is the big reason why Mana Gem has pulled ahead of Arcane Harmony, because that overlap of it's, yeah, a 45% damage buff now. That's huge. Plus 5% for Mana Gem means every Arcane Surge is 50% damage, plus the 40%. Yeah, it's a lot. And then the 4-piece on top of that. So for every 24,000 mana spent on and during Arcane Surge. I didn't actually realize that it was on and during. I thought it was just during Arcane Surge. So the mana you sink into Arcane Surge as well contributes to that buff. Okay, so it gives you a 1% damage buff for 18 seconds up to 25 stacks and more mana regen, so you can keep spamming. So essentially, what that looks like is, so I have the 45% damage buff here. Spending mana, this is not a rotation, by the way. I'm just trying to get to the end of this to show you the buff. Spending mana, and then it changes over into this. So spell damage increased, mana regen increased. So it essentially takes your 18 seconds of damage and tacks on another, what, 18 seconds on the back end of it. And then I find that that overlaps a little bit with the next Magi ramp. When it comes to trinkets, I got very lucky. Just get this in your weekly chest like I did. But you definitely want an Iridius fragment. It's unreal how much this accelerates your damage. I mean, Talon is good too, but I really like the mastery on this. Especially, yeah, it fits really well. This has been going well for me so far, but Vessel of Skittering Shadow, I think, is it gives you like a ramping haste buff. That one makes more sense to me. There are a couple other passive trinkets. I think the Neltharion one is pretty good as well, but the main trinket you want to focus on is Iridius Fragment. When it comes to stats, always sim, but I wanted to show with these stats, 27 crit, 14 haste, 9 verse, and 39 mastery. These are my stat weights. So my haste is a little bit low, clearly, but mastery is just weighted insanely high. Again, because of Mana Gem and the fact that we just get to spam Arcane Blast with all the damage buff we get. Having more mastery is really, really good. But crit, mastery are, you know, the top stats you want to target, and then I still view haste as kind of more of a quality of life thing. You're struggling to get through the rotation and you want it to speed up a little bit, you know, and obviously based on these stats, haste is not a terrible stat. And I would say probably 24%, 25% crit or higher. All right, awesome. Time to get into the rotation. So starting with the single target rotation, I didn't put a pull timer up, but you're going to be casting Evocation around 7.5 seconds left on the pull timer. I have this playing in slow motion. Speed it up. So this is real time. So you're pre-casting Arcane Blast, followed by Orb, then Lust, Pot, then Spark, Nether Tempest, followed by Arcane Surge, and then at this point, you hit Trinkets, Mana Gem, Racial, and then go into Magi. So this is the Barrage Magi combo, right? And what that is because if you remember, Barrage uses all of our arcane charges when we cast it, right? So that would put us at 0 arcane charges. But then Magi gives us 4 arcane charges. So what we do is we have Radiant Spark up, we have everything kind of everything's set. And then we cast Barrage, empties our charges, as you can see down here. And then before that Barrage hits, I casted Magi. So Magi's on the target, and then the Barrage lands. The Barrage contributes to Magi, and we don't lose a DPS global. right? So that was one of the really cool things with Magi being off the global that we gained access to in Dragonflight. So then after I cast the Barrage Magi combo, I then continue to cast Arcane Blast. And you can see here, this is actually that situation where I have 3 clear casting stacks and Radiant Spark's not done. You just keep, I think I actually just procced another one and no, I didn't. But then after this, then you go into missiles. And then at this point, the new type of missile clipping that we want to do based on the tier set is as soon as the global comes up, you want to start casting blast. And we're doing the Nether precision weaving to where it's missiles, blast, blast, missiles, blast, blast, right? I clip it, but I'm clipping it a little bit late. But you do want to, this is basically the entirety of the surge ramp. After you get through that initial Radiant Spark, Magi, it's just weaving. And then towards the end of the surge buff, you can see I have 2.3 seconds. So I use this missiles and then I hit Presence of Mind just before that missiles was up, because the goal here is I want to get 2 more Arcane Blasts in before that Arcane Surge buff drops off. So I cast 1, 2, and I got the second one you can see down here casted just before that buff dropped off. Right, so that's my goal every time on single target in the opener is that rotation. And then at this point, there's 2 different ways of using Rune of Power. I like to during Lust because A, you have Lust, and B, I have the potion embellishment, so my potions last 45 seconds. As you can see, I still have pot quite a while. So what I like to do is, as soon as Surge drops off, I use Shifting Power. And I don't use Shifting Power after casting Rune because it feels like an absolute waste of Rune to like be sitting in Rune with Shifting casting. So I like to cast Shifting Power. And then as soon as I'm done with that, I'll drop Rune. And what you'll see here is that I still have the tier damage buff, which is 25%, and pot and Lust. Right, so I like to use Rune during the tier bonus during this circumstance, during pot and Lust. And then towards the end of this, you'll see, okay, so here's the conditions. We've got 6 seconds left. I actually went for it when I think 7 seconds left on Magi. So about 7 seconds left on Magi, 9 seconds left on the tier bonus, plenty of time left on pot. So, and 6 seconds left on Rune. So what I do here is I'm going to do what is the old Magi ramp, which is using Spark initially, then casting Blast up to the 4th Spark stack, and then casting Barrage into Magi, because our tier bonus doesn't do anything for the Surge or for the mini ramp. It only affects the Surge ramp. So what I do here is I see that if I start my Spark ramp right now, then by the time I want to cast Barrage and Magi, Magi should be up, right? So I cast Radiant Spark, Arcane Blast 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I cast Nether Tempest. And then Magi, I probably point with my mouse. Magi is coming up. I'm a little early, so I had to wait the, half a global. Ideally, I should have held my Rune another global, because if you look, I lose the Rune buff right before I cast. Right before I cast Barrage, I lose the Rune buff. But if I had waited just a little bit, then I could have had the 4th Spark stack and the tier bonus and Rune and pot for that Barrage, because if you remember, Barrage snapshots. So even if I'm 40 yards away and I wait to cast that Magi until the Barrage gets right next to the target, it will still benefit from all of these damage buffs. And then that overlap right there, trying to get Magi cast right as your tier buff is dropping off, that seems to be about where the cadence is for the single target rotation and rotating your cooldown. Then at this point, it's Nether Precision Weaving. And then I clipped that one a little early because I was trying to take advantage of my pot. See how my pot was starting to drop off? I keep pointing with my finger on my mouse. Boom. So it hit just before the pot drops off. And then the filler in between ramps is pretty much this. I have a lot of mastery, so I don't generally run out of mana. But when you get to this point where you're running out of mana and you're coming up on a ramp, that's when it's time to start keeping Nether Tempest up. You want to cast Ice Nova or Fire Blast. Nether Tempest makes a good filler because it's, like I said earlier, it is a DPS increase technically to keep it up at all times. But yeah, and then so this is an example of what I do with my Surge ramp outside of Lust. So I don't use Rune directly after Surge during the tier bonus outside of Lust. It makes more sense to me. Here, I'll just show you. So we get through here. And then, well, it overlaps, right? But I'm not dropping it immediately after. I like to do the same shifting power. And then I casted missiles because I wanted to wait a little bit for the cast Rune. So Spark, Rune, and now I'm doing the Spark ramp because I have the tier bonus, Rune, and then it's gonna go into the 4th overlap there. All right, so AOE rotation. This is if I had prepped properly with my 4 arcane charges at the previous poll, this is what running in would look like. Okay, so Radiant Spark, Arcane Surge, and for AOE, you want to cast Nether Tempest after Arcane Surge, and the reason for that is because Nether Tempest has I believe it's a 12-second duration, so it's the same duration as Magi, and because of what I said earlier about how it double ticks Arcane Echo is an AOE proc. And so Nether Tempest gains huge value in AOE because of how frequently it causes Arcane Echo to tick. So you want to cast Nether Tempest after Surge so you get more of the buff up during Magi. So Arcane Surge, I hit Mana Gem and Nether Tempest, and then Barrage Magi combo, right? And then Arcane Blast. And the reason for Arcane Blast in this situation is because of Harmonic Echo. Each one of these direct Arcane Blasts are proccing for AOE damage off of my Radiant Spark target. Right? And then I get to the 4th Spark stack. And this was the situation that I was talking about earlier. To reiterate, you just want to make sure that in this circumstance, while this blast is casting, you're not pressing Barrage. Because if you press Barrage right here, it will only give you the 30% buff, not the 40% buff. So then I cast Barrage, and then since this is AOE, I do Orb, Barrage, Orb, and then Missiles. And then I like to send a Barrage into Magi right at the end. I try to send as many 4-charge barrages into Magi as I can. So what I'll do is until my last Arcane Orb, so that ramp is the same every time, but once I've used my last Arcane Orb and I have my last set of like 4 charges without having to cast Arcane Explosion 4 times to build them back up, with Magi up, I'll do Arcane Blasts, Arcane Missiles, usually you'll have clear casting procs to work with, which are really good for burst AOE, thanks to Arcane Echo. But then right as Magi ends, again, because Magi pops for AOE damage as well, it makes sense to me to send that barrage into Magi which leaves you with a little bit of an awkward tail of Arcane Surge, as you can see. But Arcane Explosion hits pretty hard anyways, so that rotation's been working for me so far. And then this is the filler. So the main difference between Arcane Harmony and the Mana Gem playstyle is, as you saw there, I used my clear casting proc on Arcane Explosion. So you want to do that on 3+ targets for Mana Gem. All right, so at this point, I don't know why I Arcane Blasted. I think I was just trying to fill. I was trying to fill that. That's what I was doing. I was trying to fill and hold my charges but I should have Arcane Explosion. Yeah, so I cast Radiant Spark, and this is the mini ramp now. Radiant Spark into Nether Tempest, followed by Rune. And if I had done it a little bit earlier, I could have used that tier buff, but in keys, generally pulls will not, you're not going to get a full round of like Surge, then mini ramp CDs chained back to back. It generally doesn't happen unless you're pushing really high keys or, you know, higher keys on a fort week. So it's not really something to shoot for. This is more of the rotation in a vacuum. So after the Nether Tempest, I drop Rune and then immediately Barrage Magi and then Arcane Blast, again, because of Harmonic Echo, to ramp up to the 4th Spark stack. And then Barrage. I have 2 Arcane Orbs. So I have Orb, Barrage, Orb. And then I think I cast Missiles here and just clip it. And then barely make it in at the end, right? And this, by the way, playing in melee is very helpful. Can be very, very helpful. Barrage travel time does matter with Magi because it needs to actually hit the target before Magi goes off. It will snapshot damage buffs, but because Magi is a debuff on your target, it has to actually fully travel to the target, to the center of the target's hitbox before it will register, or wherever the actual damage register part of the hitbox is. Last thing I want to demonstrate is, this is just what it looks like if you don't have charges running up to a pole. So it's just Spark, Orb, and then you do the normal Nether Tempest, Barrage Magi, Arcane Blast, Barrage, right? And then you just have one less to use, or one less Barrage to cast during the ramp. Thankfully, because I had 3 clear casting missiles, still a whole bunch of damage.